The palace of Narkthaven glowed with candlelight, every flame caught inside crystal chandeliers that hung like frozen stars. The great hall was full of music, laughter, and the rustle of silk and velvet. The nobles, tall and pale, shimmered in their dark finery. Their eyes glowed faintly red beneath the candlelight, a reminder of what they were: vampires, powerful and ancient. Era, a young human servant, moved quietly between them, holding a silver tray of goblets filled with dark wine. Her hands shook every time she passed a noble. She had been told on her first day, "Don't speak unless spoken to. Don't look a vampire in the eye. And never, ever draw attention." Tonight, she wished she could vanish. The Feast of Shadows happened only once a year, when every noble of the realm came to dine in the same room as their king. A mistake tonight could cost her job or worse. Era, hissed the head servant, a stern woman with sharp features. "You're walking too slow. The king's table needs more wine." "Yes, Era whispered. Her feet felt heavy as she approached the long table at the far end of the hall. It was raised slightly above the rest, lit by tall silver candelabras. There sat King Tharion, the ruler of all vampire clans, broad-shouldered, still as stone, his armor black as midnight. His cold eyes watched everything and missed nothing. But Era's gaze caught on the small figure beside him. The prince. He couldn't be more than 7 years old. His skin was pale as moonlight, his dark hair falling over his eyes. He sat very still, staring at his untouched plate. While the nobles laughed and talked around him, nobody spoke to the boy. No one even looked at him. He looks so lonely, Era thought. Like a statue that forgot how to move. She tried not to stare, but her heart tugged painfully. Something about the boy's silence felt wrong, not just shyness, but sadness that ran deep. "More wine for Lord Casvan," the head servant's whisper snapped her back to work. Era stepped forward quickly, balancing the tray in both hands. The floor gleamed like a mirror beneath her boots. She was almost at the high table when a rushing servant brushed past, bumping her elbow. The tray tilted. 3 crystal goblets slid, catching the candlelight as they fell. Era gasped. "No, no, no." The crash echoed through the hall. Red wine splashed across the white tablecloth right in front of the prince. Every sound stopped. Laughter died. The musicians froze mid-note. Era dropped to her knees, heart hammering. "I'm so sorry, Your Majesty. Please, forgive." Her words choked off when she looked up. The wine had spilled over the prince's sleeve. A shard of crystal lay inches from his small hand. But the boy didn't cry. Didn't move. His eyes, wide and dark, were fixed on the broken glass. He looked terrified but silent, like someone used to fear. Era's hands moved without thinking. Her fingers formed shapes she hadn't made in years. "Are you okay?" she signed. It was instinct. She had learned sign language for her younger brother, who'd been born deaf. Her body remembered before her mind caught up. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the boy's head jerked up. His eyes met hers, and they changed. Light sparked inside them, like a candle catching flame. He lifted his small hands and signed back, quick and excited. "You can sign? You know how?" Era's mouth fell open. She forgot the watching nobles, the silence pressing in, even the king's cold stare. She nodded and signed back. "Yes. I learned for my brother." The prince's lips curved in a wide, bright smile, a smile that looked like it hadn't been used in years. His hands moved fast. "No one hears me except my teacher. What's your name? Do you know the sign for dragon?" A murmur spread through the room. Vampires whispered behind jeweled hands. The king's gaze cut through the noise. Silence. His voice rolled like thunder, soft but deadly. Everyone fell still again. The smile slid from the boy's face. He lowered his hands, shoulders curling inward, the joy gone as quickly as it came. King Tharion rose slowly from his seat. The light from the candles shimmered against his black armor. He was taller than any man Era had ever seen, his presence filling the room like a storm cloud. Era trembled. "Your Majesty, I didn't mean." "Stand," the king commanded. She obeyed on shaking legs. The nobles leaned forward, eager to watch her punishment. The king looked down at her, his expression unreadable. Then, instead of shouting or calling guards, he asked quietly, "Where did you learn that language?" Era swallowed. "In my village, sire. My little brother couldn't hear. I learned so he wouldn't be alone." Tharion's eyes flickered, something unreadable crossing his face. "Your brother? He passed away 5 years ago," she whispered. Silence stretched again. The king turned his gaze toward his son. The boy was watching with pleading eyes, his small hands hidden in his lap. Finally, the king spoke. "Find this girl's name and post," he told the steward. "Report to my study within the hour." Era's breath caught. "He's going to have me executed," she thought. "In private." The king sat down again without another word. The musicians began playing hesitantly. Conversation resumed. But the prince's eyes stayed on Era as she was led away. Before she turned the corner, she saw him raise his hand beneath the table, signing one last word only she could see. "Thank you." Era sat alone in the servants' quarters, her heart pounding in her chest. Every tick of the wall clock sounded like a drumbeat counting down to her doom. "She's still alive," whispered one maid to another. "Not for long," said the cook. "No one spills wine on the prince and walks away." Era squeezed her trembling hands together. She tried not to cry. She kept remembering the prince's face when he'd smiled, how it had lit up the whole hall. A child shouldn't look that lonely. After what felt like forever, the steward arrived. He was a thin vampire with silver spectacles and the calm voice of someone who'd seen everything. "Era of the lower hall," he said. She stood at once. "Yes, sir. You are to report to the East Wing kitchen at dawn." Her heart dropped. "The East Wing. That is correct. You'll prepare and deliver breakfast to the prince's courtyard." Era blinked. "Wait, so I'm not dismissed." The steward's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "No, girl. You're being promoted." Then he turned and left before she could say another word. That night Era barely slept. When dawn light crept into the servants' dormitory, her roommate Myra sat up and gaped at the paper in Era's hands. "The prince's courtyard," Myra whispered. "That's where they send the most trusted servants." "There must be a mistake," Era said weakly. "No mistake," Myra replied, eyes wide. "Everyone's talking about what happened at the banquet. They say you made the prince laugh. No one's ever seen him do that." Era blushed. "He just needed someone to listen." Myra grabbed her shoulders. "Listen, Era. The king doesn't do anything without a reason. If he's putting you near his son, it's deliberate. Be careful." Era nodded, but inside she felt something strange, not fear this time, but a spark of curiosity. The prince's courtyard lay at the end of a long marble corridor lined with portraits of stern vampire ancestors. Era's footsteps echoed softly as she carried the breakfast tray, warm bread, fruit, a silver teapot, and a small pitcher of crimson wine that wasn't wine at all. When she pushed open the iron gate, she gasped. The courtyard was a hidden garden, alive even though the rest of the castle was made of stone and shadow. Pale flowers bloomed in the morning light, their petals glowing softly as if holding bits of moonlight inside. A fountain bubbled quietly in the center, surrounded by silver-leafed trees. And there, sitting cross-legged on the grass, was the prince. He hadn't noticed her. He was holding something in both hands, a tiny bird's nest. He studied it with serious concentration, his dark hair falling into his eyes. Era set the tray on the table, trying not to make noise. But the soft clink of the teapot made him look up. When he saw her, his face lit up instantly. "You came," he signed, his small hands moving fast. "I thought maybe I dreamed you. Nobody told me you'd be here." Era smiled, her nerves melting a little. She signed back slowly. "I'm real. My name is Era." "Era," he repeated in careful fingerspelling. "That's a pretty name." "I'm Kale." He looked proud as he signed his own name. "I know," she signed. "Prince Kale." He shook his head quickly, grinning. "Just Kale, please." Era laughed softly. "All right, just Kale." He looked at the breakfast tray. "Did you bring food for me?" "Yes. Bread, fruit, and tea." She didn't mention the crimson drink. Kale hesitated, glancing toward the palace walls as if expecting someone to scold him. "You'll get in trouble for staying." "I'll risk it," Era said, sitting carefully on the edge of the stone bench. "I don't have anywhere more important to be." Kale smiled shyly and began to eat, small bites at first. Then his hands started moving again, eager and fast. "I used to have a tutor who knew sign. He was old and grumpy, but he left last winter. Father said no one else needed to learn." Era's heart hurt for him. "You must get lonely." Kale looked down at his plate. "It's quiet all the time. Even when there are people around." She nodded. "I understand." "You do." "My brother couldn't hear either," Era signed softly. "We used to talk with our hands all day." The house was quiet, but it was a happy quiet. Kale studied her face for a long moment. "What happened to him?" "He got sick when I was your age," she said. "He didn't get better." The prince's expression fell. Then, after a moment, he signed, "I'm sorry." Era smiled through the sudden sting in her chest. "Thank you." They sat in silence for a while, listening to the fountain. A bird fluttered past them, and Kale brightened. He held up the small nest again. "It fell from the willow tree," he explained. "I think the babies are gone. Maybe they'll build a new one." "They will," Era said. "Birds always try again." "I wish I could build one for them," Kale signed sadly. "But my hands are too big for bird nests." "They're the perfect size for signing," she replied. That made him grin again. Later, as Era gathered the empty dishes, Kale hesitated. "Can you come back tomorrow?" he signed quickly. "Teacher doesn't come until after lunch, and it's quiet." Era nodded. "I'll come." He looked like he wanted to hug her but didn't dare. Instead, he signed, "Thank you for talking to me." "It's easy," she replied. "You just needed someone to listen." From the shadowed archway beyond the garden, King Tharion stood unseen, watching. He had come to check on his son and found something unexpected instead: a small human girl kneeling in the grass, laughing softly while the boy who never smiled signed excitedly in her direction. The king's cold mask cracked for just a moment. Something old and painful stirred in his chest. He turned and walked away without a word, but his thoughts followed him all the way back to his throne room. Later, he would stand at the tall window overlooking the city and murmur to his steward, "The human girl. The one who signs. Keep her near my son." The steward bowed. "As you wish, Your Majesty." And somewhere in the East Wing, Era sat awake long after the lamps were out, thinking of the boy with the bright smile and wondering why she already cared so much. The next morning, Era stood before the grand doors of the East Wing kitchen, her hands folded tightly against her apron. The corridors around her were hushed, the marble floors gleaming like silver water. Servants hurried past, their heads bowed. No one spoke to her. They looked at her as though she carried a secret or a curse. Inside the kitchen, the air smelled of warm bread and herbs. A few cooks glanced up, whispering. "That's her," one muttered. "The one who made the prince smile. Or bewitched him," another said darkly. Era tried to ignore them and focused on preparing the breakfast tray. Her fingers worked quickly: fresh bread, honey, berries, a pot of warm tea, and a crystal goblet of thick red wine for the prince's father, just in case he appeared. Every detail had to be perfect. When everything was ready, she took a steadying breath and started down the long corridor that led to the moon courtyard again. This time she didn't tremble quite as much. There was still fear, yes, but also something else. Something new. Hope. The moment she stepped into the courtyard, she saw Kale sitting under the silver willow tree. His dark hair was tangled by the wind, and sunlight danced on his pale face. He looked up the instant she entered and smiled so widely that Era's chest warmed. "You came back," he signed quickly, his fingers flashing with excitement. "I promised," she signed back. He laughed silently, his shoulders shaking with delight. Then he jumped to his feet and ran to meet her, his bare feet leaving small prints in the dew-covered grass. "I found something," he signed eagerly, tugging at her sleeve. "Come see." Era followed him to the base of the willow tree. Hidden in the roots was a small wooden box. Inside lay a collection of smooth stones, each carefully arranged by color. Deep blues, soft grays, and one brilliant red. "These are mine," Kale signed proudly. I collect them. Every color means something. Blue is for peace. Gray is for rain. Red, he paused, thinking. Red is for brave. Era smiled. Then you must be red. Me? Kale looked surprised. I'm not brave. You are, she replied. It takes courage to speak when no one listens. He looked down at the red stone in his palm, his expression thoughtful. Then you're red too, he signed, and pressed the stone into her hand. Era blinked. Kale, I can't take this. It's a gift, he insisted, small but firm. So you don't forget me when you leave. Leave, she repeated, frowning. Who said anything about leaving? His hands slowed, hesitating. Everyone leaves, he signed softly. Tutors, servants, guards. They stay for a while, then they go. Sometimes father sends them away. Sometimes they just stop coming. Something in his silence cut her. She crouched down so their eyes were level. I'm not going anywhere, she signed firmly. Not unless you ask me to. Kale's eyes widened, and then, slowly, he nodded. Promise. Promise. That afternoon, while Kale napped on the grass, Era sat on a nearby bench, polishing the silver tray. Her thoughts were a swirl of confusion. Why had the king kept his son so isolated? Why did everyone act as if speaking to the boy were dangerous? She looked up at the palace walls. High windows reflected the sky like mirrors. Somewhere behind them, she imagined King Tharion sitting on his black throne, watching everything and feeling nothing. But maybe she was wrong. Maybe there was a reason for his coldness. Before she could think more, footsteps echoed across the courtyard. Era looked up and froze. The king himself stood at the gate. He wasn't wearing his armor this time. Instead, a dark tunic of velvet, simple but regal. His presence filled the garden even without a word. The air seemed to still around him. Era jumped to her feet, bowing low. Your Majesty. Tharion said nothing for a long moment. His eyes, sharp as a blade, swept over the garden, the sleeping boy beneath the tree, the servant girl standing awkwardly by the fountain. When he finally spoke, his voice was quiet but carried easily through the air. He smiles when you are near. Era blinked, unsure if she was meant to answer. He's very kind, sire. The king studied her face, as though trying to decide whether she was lying. You speak his language, he said. No one else in this palace can. Yes, sire. I learned it for my brother. Tharion's gaze flickered to the red stone still in her hand. My son gave you that. Era nodded. He said red means brave. Something strange passed across the king's face, something like pain. He turned slightly away, his voice low. He was not supposed to be alone. But his mother, she was the one who understood softness. I was made for war, not this. Era hesitated. You love him, she said before she could stop herself. Tharion's head turned sharply. Watch your tongue, girl. She bowed quickly. Forgive me, sire. For a moment, he said nothing. Then he sighed, a sound that seemed to carry centuries of weariness. Leave the tray. Wake him when he's ready. And teach him the word for father. Era looked up in surprise, but the king was already walking away, his cloak trailing behind him like a shadow. Days passed, and a new rhythm began. Every morning, Era brought breakfast to the moon courtyard. Every morning, Kale waited for her, sometimes with drawings, sometimes with stones, sometimes just with questions he had saved overnight. They spoke constantly in signs. Era's hands grew faster and smoother, Kale's eyes shone brighter every day. He was a quick learner, curious, sharp, and endlessly creative. He taught her small things about the vampire court, how the nobles held their goblets, what each crest on the banners meant, how moonflowers bloomed only for those who carried royal blood. One morning, while she poured tea, Kale asked, Era, do you believe in curses? She looked at him. Why do you ask? He hesitated, then signed, because the guards think I have one. What kind of curse? They say I was born wrong. That my silence brings bad luck. That's why no one touches me. I think they're afraid it's true. Era felt anger rise in her chest. You're not cursed, she signed firmly. You're gifted. You speak with your hands, and you see what others miss. That's not a curse. Kale's brow furrowed. Then why does father look sad when I sign? She thought for a moment. Maybe because he doesn't understand yet. The boy's eyes lifted hopefully. But he could learn. Era smiled. Anyone can learn, if they want to. Kale nodded slowly, as if storing the thought away like one of his precious stones. That afternoon, rain began to fall. Most servants hid indoors, but Era stayed with Kale beneath the willow tree, their shoulders brushing as they watched the droplets make circles in the fountain. Do you miss your brother? Kale signed softly. Every day, Era replied. He tilted his head. Do you think he would have liked me? I know he would, she said, smiling. You remind me of him sometimes. How? You both have kind hearts. Kale smiled shyly, then looked toward the palace. Father used to be kind once, before mother died. What was she like? Era asked gently. He thought for a while before signing. Warm. She smelled like summer rain. She used to tell me stories about humans who could hear the stars sing. Era's throat tightened. She sounds wonderful. She was. He paused. After she died, father stopped talking to me. He tried once, but he got angry because I didn't answer with words. Then he never tried again. Era looked toward the tall windows of the palace, her jaw tightening. Then we'll teach him how. Kale blinked. Teach father? Yes. If he learns to sign, he can talk to you again. Kale's face lit up, but then fell almost immediately. He won't. He doesn't like weakness. Loving you isn't weakness, Era signed fiercely. It's the strongest thing he'll ever do. The prince looked at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, he smiled again, small but genuine. The next day, when Era entered the courtyard, she found Kale waiting with 2 new drawings. One showed her with a tray of food. The other showed him and his father standing together beneath the same willow tree. Will it happen? He signed hopefully. Someday. Yes, Era said. We'll make sure it does. That evening, Era was summoned to the king's private study. Her heart pounded as she followed the steward through the dark halls. The walls here were lined with ancient weapons and faded maps of forgotten wars. When she entered, King Tharion was standing by the fire, his back to her. Shadows flickered over the armor displayed behind him. You've been spending much time with my son, he said without turning. Era bowed. Yes, your majesty. He speaks more now. Yes, sire. You make him laugh. I try. There was a long silence. Then the king said quietly, he asked me to learn his language. Era blinked. He did. Tharion finally turned. His expression was hard to read, but something softer lingered beneath. He said you could teach me. Era hesitated. If you wish it, sire. Show me one word. She nodded nervously. Let's start simple. She lifted her hand, forming the sign for father. This means father. You touch your forehead, then bring your hand down to your chest. Tharion copied the movement, stiff and awkward. Like this. Almost, she said gently. She reached forward to adjust his fingers and froze when she realized what she was doing. Touching the king was forbidden. But he didn't move away. Her voice softened. There. Now try again. He did. The movement was still clumsy, but the meaning was clear. He looked at her, uncertain. And this means he will know I am, father? Era nodded. Yes. The king looked down at his large hands. Strange. I have used these to hold swords, to end wars, yet not to speak to my own child. Era didn't know what to say. The silence between them was heavy but not cold. It was full of unspoken grief. Finally, Tharion said, that will be all. She bowed and turned to leave. But as she reached the door, his voice stopped her. Era. She turned. Yes, your majesty. Thank you, for speaking where I could not. Era's breath caught. You're welcome, sire. Later that night, Kale waited by his window, watching the rain. When Era entered quietly with his supper, he jumped up, his hands flying with excitement. You spoke to father, he signed eagerly. Era smiled. I did. His eyes widened. Did he learn anything? One word, she said. What word? Era raised her hand and signed father. Kale froze. His eyes filled with tears. Then, slowly, he copied her movement. His small hands trembled. He learned this. Yes, Era whispered. He asked to. For a long moment, Kale didn't move. Then he ran forward and hugged her tightly, his small arms fierce around her waist. She knelt down, hugging him back. Thank you, he signed against her shoulder. You made him see me. Era smiled, brushing his hair gently. No, Kale. You made him want to see. That night, long after the candles had burned low, King Tharion sat alone in his study. His hands moved slowly, repeating the same motion over and over, forehead, chest, until he no longer had to think about it. In the quiet, he whispered to the empty room. My son. And for the first time in years, the word didn't feel like a burden. It felt like a promise. Spring deepened over Narkthaven. Pale vines crept along the marble walls, and the air in the moon courtyard smelled of wet earth and new blossoms. Every morning Era arrived with her tray, and every morning Prince Kale was waiting, his bare feet already wet with dew. The prince had changed in small but startling ways. He moved with confidence now, his eyes no longer darted to the guards in fear. He smiled more, small, secret smiles that made Era forget where she was. That morning he greeted her with a mischievous look. Close your eyes, he signed. Why? She asked aloud, laughing. Just do it. Era obeyed. Something soft and cool brushed against her palm. When she looked, she found a single moon-white flower resting there. I grew it for you, Kale signed proudly. Teacher says flowers don't grow here because the soil's too cold. But I kept it in the sun every day. It's beautiful, Era said, tucking it behind her ear. Thank you, Your Highness. He made a face. Not Your Highness. Just Kale. All right, thank you, Kale. The boy grinned so wide that his fangs showed for the first time. They were small, delicate things like pearls rather than weapons. For a heartbeat Era saw not a vampire heir but a child proud of his first gift. When breakfast was done, Kale insisted on teaching her a new game. He called it Light and Shadow. The rules were simple. One person used their hands to cast shapes in the sunlight, the other guessed what they were. Era's shadow animals were clumsy, a rabbit that looked like a blob, a bird that kept losing its wings, but Kale's were graceful. His fingers turned into dragons, wolves, and dancing stars. Every time she guessed right, he laughed in that silent way of his, shoulders shaking with joy. They played until their arms ached. When they finally collapsed on the grass, Kale signed, You make the days shorter. Era frowned, pretending not to understand. Shorter. Because they end too soon. Her chest tightened. Mine too, she admitted. That afternoon, Era walked through the palace corridors carrying an empty tray. For once, she didn't feel invisible. Other servants nodded politely, and even the guards seemed less cold. News had spread, the mute prince smiled now, and the human girl from the lower kitchens was the reason. But not everyone was pleased. In the shadow of a stone archway stood Lord Varin, one of the high nobles. His silver eyes followed Era as she passed. So that's her, he murmured to another lord. The girl who teaches the prince tricks instead of discipline. She's harmless, the other replied. No human in the royal wing is harmless, Varin said softly. The king grows weak. His mercy spreads like rot. Their voices faded as Era turned the corner, unaware of the storm they were brewing. The next morning, Kale was waiting with a new surprise, a pile of storybooks stacked nearly as tall as he was. I borrowed them from the old library, he signed excitedly. They're vampire fairy tales. Will you read with me? Era hesitated. Am I allowed? Father said I should study more. Reading counts. He gave her the innocent look that could convince anyone. They sat together under the willow tree, pages spread between them. The stories were full of magic and monsters, creatures who hid their hearts inside mirrors, princesses who could hear the moon sing. Whenever Kale didn't know a word, Era taught him its sign. Whenever she stumbled over an old vampire phrase, he corrected her with patient pride. You're a better teacher than I am, she said once. Kale shook his head. You teach me things that matter. She laughed softly. Like what? How to be seen. The words were simple, but they hit her like a blade made of kindness. Before she could answer, a shadow fell over them. King Tharion stood at the edge of the courtyard. He wasn't in armor this time, just a black cloak that moved gently in the wind. His expression was unreadable, but Era noticed his hands. They were clasped behind his back, knuckles white. Watching. Listening. Kale's joy vanished. He jumped to his feet, bowing quickly, eyes on the ground. Era rose too, curtsying deeply. For a long time, no one spoke. Finally, the king said, "Continue." The single word startled them both. Kale looked up uncertainly. "Continue?" Tharion nodded once. Slowly, Kale picked up the book again. His hands trembled, but when Era gave him an encouraging smile, he began to sign the story. As he moved through the tale, the lonely dragon who found a friend Era spoke the words aloud for the king to hear. When the story ended, the king's voice came softly, again. They did. Twice more. By the time the last page closed, Kale's movements were steady again, his eyes bright. Tharion watched every gesture, every flicker of expression, and when his son finally finished, something in the king's shoulders eased. He nodded once more and turned to leave. But before he stepped through the archway, Era saw his hand twitch, an uncertain movement, half of a sign he hadn't yet learned. Later, Kale whispered with his hands. He was watching, but he wasn't angry. "No," Era said. "I think he was proud." The next few days became a pattern of sunlight and small lessons. Kale showed Era how to read the constellations carved into the palace ceiling. Era taught him human songs, spoken softly while he watched her lips to understand the rhythm. They invented new signs together, secret gestures that belonged to them alone. Each evening, when Era returned to her narrow bed in the servants' hall, she felt something she hadn't known in years: purpose. But outside their quiet garden, whispers were multiplying. Servants spoke of a bond forming between prince and human girl, and nobles began to murmur that the heir was being led astray. The night before the midsummer feast, the palace was restless. Lanterns glowed along the corridors, and the scent of roasting meat drifted through the air. Era carried Kale's dinner tray through the back halls, humming softly. Halfway to the courtyard, she felt it, the sense of being watched. She turned. Nothing. Only the long hall, silent except for the echo of her own footsteps. She hurried on, uneasy. In the moon courtyard, Kale was waiting as always, his eyes bright. He signed, "You're late." "I'm sorry," she said, setting down the tray. The kitchens were chaos. He grinned. "I forgive you." They ate together, trading stories. Kale told her about the palace ghosts that supposedly whispered in the walls. Era told him about fireflies in the human villages, little lights that danced like stars made tiny. "I've never seen one," he signed. "Maybe one day," she said. "When you're older." He laughed. "Father would never let me leave the palace." Era smiled sadly. "Maybe we'll change his mind." As twilight deepened, Era heard footsteps behind the garden wall. She turned, but saw no one. Kale noticed her tense shoulders. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," she lied. "Just the wind." But it wasn't the wind. High above them, in the shadows of the balcony, King Tharion stood watching again. He had meant to check on his son for only a moment. Instead he found himself staying, listening to their laughter, watching how the boy's hands moved like quicksilver while the girl followed every motion as if it were music. The sight stirred something unfamiliar in him. Jealousy and gratitude tangled together. Jealousy because his son shared a language with someone else. Gratitude because that someone had given him back his child. When Kale finally went inside to sleep, Tharion descended from the balcony and crossed the courtyard silently. Era, stacking dishes by the fountain, gasped when she saw him. "Sire." He raised a hand. "Be at ease. You've done nothing wrong." Era bowed. "I only wished to keep him company, Your Majesty." "I know," Tharion said quietly. "You've given him peace." His gaze drifted toward the willow tree. "I had forgotten what that looked like." She hesitated, then asked, "May I say something without offense, sire?" "Speak." "He doesn't need peace only. He needs you." The words hung in the air like a bell that refused to stop ringing. The king's eyes narrowed. but not in anger. He looked lost. "He does not wish for me near," he said at last. Era shook her head. "He wishes for you every day." Tharion turned away, the edge of his cloak whispering across the stones. "Then perhaps I should learn faster." The following morning brought the feast of Midsummer, when nobles from every clan gathered under the silver banners of Narchthaven. The palace glittered like a mountain of stars. Musicians tuned their instruments, servants rushed through the halls with platters heavy as shields. Era was assigned to the upper gallery, away from the main crowd, pouring wine for lesser lords. She preferred it until she noticed Lord Varin among them. He watched her pour, a thin smile on his face. "Tell me, girl," he said softly, "how does it feel to have the ear of a prince?" Era kept her eyes on the goblet. "I only serve as I'm told, my lord." "Oh, but you do more than serve." He leaned closer. "They say the boy laughs for you. Speaks for you. Dangerous things, laughter and speech. They change the hearts of kings. I don't understand." "Then allow me to explain. The council prefers the prince quiet. A silent heir is a safe heir. If he begins to talk, if he begins to feel, he might become something else. Something troublesome." Era's hand trembled. "He's just a child." "Exactly," Varin said. "And children are easily broken." She froze. When she looked up, his smile was gone. His eyes were cold and ancient. "Stay in your place, human. Teach him to sign, if you must, but remember, if the prince forgets what silence means, it will not be him who pays the price." He left her standing there, the tray shaking in her hands. That night she couldn't sleep. His words echoed in her mind. A silent heir is a safe heir. Was that why they called Kale cursed? Because he was different. Because he might change things. Before dawn she went to the courtyard, needing air. The sky was still dark, stars fading above the towers. She found Kale already awake, sitting beside the fountain with his knees drawn up. "You're early," she whispered. He smiled sleepily. "Couldn't rest. Too many thoughts." She sat beside him. "What kind of thoughts?" He hesitated, then signed slowly, "About the future. About father. About you." "Me," she said, surprised. "Sometimes I think the palace will make you forget me. Everyone forgets eventually." Era shook her head. "I never forget people who matter." He studied her face, then reached out and touched her wrist, lightly, uncertainly. "Then you'll stay?" "I'll stay." Behind them, unseen in the growing light, the king watched once more from the balcony. But this time his expression was not cold. There was a hint of a smile, faint as dawn itself. He turned to the steward beside him. "Keep an eye on Lord Varin. His interest in the servant grows, political." "Yes, Majesty." The king looked down again at the two figures by the fountain, his son signing happily, the human girl listening with patient care, and murmured, "If she is the key to his joy, then she stays. Whatever the cost." That day marked a quiet shift in the palace. Guards began to nod respectfully when Era passed. The steward left a stack of parchment at her door, official sign language lessons for the royal staff, written in her neat human script. Somewhere, deep inside the old vampire halls, light was finding its way in. But not everyone welcomed it. Lord Varin's whisper spread like poison. "The king weakens. The servant corrupts the heir." Change had begun, and change always draws enemies. Era didn't yet know that by teaching a lonely child to speak, she had also taught a kingdom to hope, and some hearts preferred the comfort of silence. The night after the midsummer feast, the palace was quiet again, its corridors washed in moonlight. Era couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she heard Lord Varin's warning, "A silent heir is a safe heir." Those words had sunk deep like thorns. She kept thinking of Kale, his laughter, his fragile hope, and how easily the nobles might snuff it out. By dawn, she made up her mind. She couldn't protect him from rumors or politics, but she could help him become stronger, surer, more confident in his silence. She could teach him that his difference was power, not weakness. That morning, Kale greeted her with his usual smile, but it faded when he saw the tired look on her face. "Bad dreams?" he signed. "Something like that," she replied softly. I was thinking about how much more there is for you to learn. He looked intrigued. More words. More stories. Something better, she said, lowering her voice. Have you ever been to the Royal Library? His eyes widened. No one's allowed in there. Father says it's dangerous for children. Too many old spells. Spells or not, she said with a grin, that sounds like the perfect place for secrets. Cale hesitated. His small hands flickered nervously. If we're caught. We won't be. She winked. We'll be careful. He studied her for a moment, then nodded eagerly. All right. Let's be careful together. The Royal Library was hidden in the oldest part of the palace, behind heavy oak doors carved with ancient runes. Dust clung to the air like cobwebs, and the smell of parchment and wax filled the vast room. Shelves rose higher than the eye could follow, ladders hanging like vines from the balconies. Cale's eyes went wide with wonder. It's like a forest of stories. Era smiled. Exactly. They wandered between the rows, fingers brushing over leather spines. Titles written in old vampire script gleamed faintly: The Chronicles of Moonfire, The Book of the First Silence, Legends of Blood and Sun. Near the back, they found a section hidden behind a cracked marble pillar. The books there were thinner, older, their pages worn soft by time. On one shelf lay a set of scrolls marked with an unfamiliar symbol, 2 interlocking hands. Era pulled one down carefully. The parchment was fragile but intact. She unrolled it and gasped. It's sign language, she whispered. But different. Older. Cale leaned over her shoulder, eyes bright. The scroll was filled with graceful drawings of hands and strange notes written in a flowing script neither of them could read. At the top, a faded title, The Language of the Firstborn. What does it mean? Cale signed. I don't know, Era said. But look, these aren't human symbols. They're vampire signs. Your people must have used them once. Cale's eyes flickered. Before they stopped listening. Maybe they forgot, Era said softly. Maybe you're the first to remember. He looked down at his hands, flexing them slowly. Maybe it's not a curse at all. Era smiled. Maybe it's a gift. They spent the rest of the day exploring the scrolls, copying symbols onto spare paper. Some signs were familiar, others were strange, shaped like poetry rather than words. Cale learned fast, picking up the new gestures with sharp curiosity. Every time he mastered one, he'd glance at her proudly, and she'd applaud with silent claps. When evening came, the torches burned low. Cale yawned, curling up on the soft carpet with his notes. You should sleep, Era whispered. You too, he signed drowsily, and within moments, his eyes closed. She watched him for a while, the faint light painting his face in gold. For all his pale beauty and strange blood, he looked like any boy, gentle, curious, dreaming of worlds that loved him back. She didn't hear the footsteps until they stopped behind her. King Tharion stood in the doorway, half in shadow. His eyes went immediately to his son, asleep beside the scrolls. For a long moment he said nothing. Then, softly, you broke the rules. Era rose, her heart hammering. I'm sorry, sire. He wanted to learn. I thought that this would please me. The king stepped forward, his cloak brushing the floor. His voice wasn't angry, but tired. These texts are ancient. Forbidden for a reason. I meant no harm, Era said quickly. He found something in them, something important. They speak of old vampire signs, the same language he uses. It proves he isn't cursed. Tharion's gaze flickered to the open scrolls. His expression darkened, but not with rage, something more complicated. I know those words, he murmured. The language of the firstborn. It was once sacred. My ancestors used it to speak to the sun without burning. Era blinked. Then why did it disappear? Because we forgot how to listen. He looked down at his sleeping son. And now a child must remind us. Silence stretched between them, heavy but full of meaning. Then the king said quietly, take him back to his rooms. No one else must know what you found. Era hesitated. Do you want me to destroy the scrolls? Tharion's eyes lingered on Cale. No. Not yet. Some truths deserve to wake. Later, after Cale was safely asleep, Era sat by her window copying the ancient signs by candlelight. Her hand shook slightly, not from fear but from the feeling that something vast had shifted. She didn't know it yet, but the discovery in that dusty library had set fate in motion, and soon, the palace of Narkthaven would no longer be able to hide behind silence. 2 weeks later, the palace was alive with gossip. Word had spread that the human girl had broken the king's rules. No one knew how servants whispered of stolen books, enchanted signs, even forbidden magic, but every version of the story ended with the same name, Era. She felt the change the moment she stepped into the kitchens. Conversations stopped. Eyes followed her. Trays clattered a little too loudly. Even her friend Myra avoided her gaze. "What did I do?" Era asked quietly. Myra bit her lip. "You went too far. The nobles are saying you've bewitched the prince. That you use your hands to cast spells." Era stared in disbelief. "Spells? I'm teaching him how to speak." "I know," Myra said. "But they don't want to understand." Before Era could answer, a cold voice spoke behind her. "Miss Era Thorne." She turned. A pair of royal guards stood in the doorway, their silver armor gleaming. "The Lord Chancellor requests your presence in the East Solar," one said. Era's stomach dropped. She wiped her hands on her apron, heart racing, and followed them through the palace. The East Solar was a grand room filled with sunlight that somehow still felt cold. At its center stood Lord Valen, the king's chief advisor, a tall, thin vampire with eyes like polished ice. He didn't look up as she entered, his attention on a parchment covered in neat handwriting. "Miss Thorne," he said at last, "you've been spending considerable time with His Highness." "Yes, my lord," she said quietly. "It's my duty." He nodded slowly. "And yet, your duties seem to extend far beyond what was assigned. Teaching him human games, human stories, even human emotions." Era frowned. "He's a child. He needs kindness. He needs discipline," Valen corrected, his tone sharp. "He is heir to the throne, not a toy to be softened by mortal affection." She bit her tongue, fighting back anger. "I only wanted him to feel less alone." "You've done more than that," he said. "You've made him dependent. The court whispers that he cannot sleep without you nearby, cannot eat unless you serve him yourself. You've made yourself indispensable. That is a dangerous position for a servant." Era's chest tightened. "I never meant." "Intentions don't matter," Valen interrupted. "Results do." He stepped closer, his shadow long across the floor. "Do you love the prince, Miss Thorne?" Era blinked, startled. "Love? He's a child. I care for him, yes, but not like that." Valen's lips curved into a cold smile. Care is a dangerous word in a court built on power. He turned and gestured to the desk. On it lay a sealed document bearing the royal crest. "This is a transfer order. You are to leave the East Wing by nightfall. You will be reassigned to the South Wing kitchens. You will not see the prince again." Era's hands clenched. "No. You can't." "This decision was made for the good of the crown," Valen said smoothly. "You may collect your wages before leaving. Consider this mercy." She took a step forward. "Did the king approve this?" "The king has many burdens. He leaves such matters to my judgment." Era's heart pounded. "You're lying. The king wouldn't." "Careful, girl," Valen hissed, his polite mask cracking. "Defiance doesn't suit your station." He turned away, dismissing her. "You're dismissed." Era stumbled out of the solar, shaking. Anger, fear, and disbelief twisted together inside her. The corridors seemed to tilt and blur. Before she knew it, her feet had carried her to the moon courtyard. Cale was waiting by the fountain, his face lighting up the moment he saw her. The joy faded instantly when he saw her tears. "What happened?" he signed urgently. Era knelt before him. Her hands trembled as she signed back. "They're sending me away." Cale froze. "Why? Did you do something wrong?" "No," she said. "They think I shouldn't be near you." His eyes widened. "You're leaving?" "I don't want to," she whispered. "But they won't let me stay." Cale's face crumpled. He signed quickly, desperately. "I'll tell father. He'll stop them." Era caught his hands gently. He might not know. Then I'll make him know. Kale's signs grew wild. They can't take you. He stopped, breathing hard, then signed smaller, slower. I need my friend. The words shattered her heart. I'm not going anywhere, she said fiercely. Not until you're safe. Do you understand? I'll find a way. He looked up at her with tearful eyes, shaking his head. Everyone says that. They all leave. Not me. She cupped his face gently, wiping away a tear. I made a promise. Kale's lip trembled. Then, slowly, he signed, promise again. I promise, she said aloud. No matter what happens, I'll come back. He threw his arms around her, clinging tight. His small body shook against hers, silent sobs racking his chest. She held him until the sun began to set, the world around them glowing in shades of gold and sorrow. Up on the balcony above, King Tharion stood in shadow, unseen. He had come to tell his son goodnight, but instead, he had witnessed everything. The girl's vow, the boy's tears, and the truth in their hands. Behind him, Lord Valin approached quietly. Your Majesty, he began, about the servant. Tharion lifted a hand. Enough. My liege, her influence. I said enough. The king's voice was calm but deadly cold. You will rescind your order. Valin blinked. But. Tharion turned, eyes like stormlight. Do not mistake my silence for blindness. You overstep. The advisor bowed stiffly. As you wish, sire. When he was gone, the king looked back down at the courtyard where his son still clung to the human girl. The sight pierced something deep inside him. He whispered to the night, You were right, Era Thorn. He doesn't need peace. He needs to be seen. And for the first time in many years, King Tharion made a decision not as a ruler but as a father. The storm broke over Narkthaven just after midnight. Rain hammered the palace roofs and lightning flickered against the high windows of the royal study. King Tharion stood at his desk, papers scattered before him, none of them read. He had tried to focus on treaties and troop reports, but his mind kept circling back to the courtyard, his son's small hands moving desperately, the girl's voice trembling as she promised to stay. He had not heard words like that in years. Not since Elena. He turned toward the fire, jaw tight. The flamelight threw moving shadows across the shelves of old books and trophies of war. They looked like ghosts bowing and twisting, whispering things he didn't wish to remember. A knock came at the door. Enter, he said. Era stepped hesitantly inside, escorted by the steward. Her dress was damp from the rain, hair clinging to her cheeks, but her eyes were steady. You sent for me, Your Majesty. I did. Tharion gestured for the steward to leave. When the door closed, the room fell silent except for the crackle of the fire. He studied her for a long moment. You disobeyed a direct order of the council. Era swallowed. I didn't know it came from the council, sire. I only knew the prince needed me. Need, he repeated softly, almost to himself. Strange word. My people are taught never to need anything. It breeds weakness. Then maybe it's time they learn differently. The boldness in her tone startled him. For a heartbeat his old anger rose, the reflex of a king unused to contradiction, but it faded when he saw the fear beneath her courage. She wasn't defying him to challenge, she was pleading for a child. Do you know, he said slowly, how long I've tried to reach my son? 7 years. I brought the finest tutors in the realm. None succeeded. He looked at them the way he looks at the marble statues in the hall, empty, cold. Era's voice softened. Because none of them spoke his language. Tharion's hands tightened on the desk edge. And you do. I was just lucky enough to understand what he needed. Luck, the king murmured. Or something more. He crossed to the window. Outside, lightning painted the courtyard white for an instant, the willow tree glistening with rain, the fountain dancing under the storm. When I was his age, he said, I was trained to fight, not to feel. My father said emotion was a wound waiting to be used against me. I believed him. Then Elena taught me I was wrong. Era stayed still, hardly breathing. She was human, Tharion continued, voice lower now, rougher. She spoke with warmth instead of command. The court despised her for it. They called her the soft queen. But when she smiled, even monsters forgot to bare their fangs. He paused. When she died, the palace went quiet again. I thought silence would protect my son from pain. I see now it only taught him fear. He turned back to Era, and for the first time she saw not a king carved from marble but a man tired of his own walls. I owe you an apology, he said. Sire. You risked everything for him. And I repaid you with suspicion. He moved to the table, took a sheet of parchment, and signed it with a heavy pen. This nullifies the transfer order. From this day forward, you are appointed as the prince's tutor and companion, by my hand alone. No council will overrule it. Era stared at the parchment, stunned. Your Majesty. I will not lose my son to their politics, Tharion said. If I must break every law written by my forefathers, so be it. He handed her the paper, then added quietly, there is one condition. You must teach me as well. Her breath caught. Teach you? To speak as he does. He hesitated, almost embarrassed. He asked me once to learn. I want to answer him properly this time. A smile broke through Era's shock. Of course, sire. Tharion exhaled as though releasing years of weight. We begin now. Show me the sign for forgive. She lifted her hands, moving them slowly so he could follow. Forgive, a sweep across the chest, like wiping dust from the heart. He mimicked the motion clumsily. Again, she said gently. He tried, still stiff, but closer. She stepped forward to guide his hand. The calluses of a warrior's palm brushed her fingers. There, she whispered. Now you're saying it right. He looked down at their joined hands. And this means he will understand me? Yes, she said. He'll understand everything. Thunder rolled outside. In the flicker of the firelight, the ancient king and the human servant practiced in silence, one learning the language of forgiveness, the other teaching hope. Morning came clear and gold after the storm. Era woke to the sound of bells announcing the new day. She dressed quickly, the parchment of her royal appointment folded safely in her pocket. In the courtyard, Kale was waiting, bouncing on his heels. When he saw her, his hands flew with excitement. You didn't leave. Never, she said aloud, smiling. And I have news. He tilted his head. Good news or bad? Good, I think. Your father wants to learn sign language. Kale froze, disbelief written across his face. You're joking. No. He asked me himself. For a moment the boy just stared, then his hands trembled with sudden joy. He wants to talk to me. He does. Kale spun in a small circle, laughing soundlessly. When? Today. They met in the same garden where silence had once ruled. The king arrived without guards, dressed simply, though the weight of his crown was never far from him. He paused at the gate, uncertain, until Kale ran forward and stopped a few steps away. Era signed slowly, so both could follow. Kale, this is a lesson for all of us. We'll start with small words. Kale nodded, still half shy before his father. Tharion watched her hands closely. First, Era said, hello. She lifted her hand in a gentle wave. Kale repeated it, grinning. Then Tharion copied them both, the gesture stiff but sincere. Kale giggled and signed back, you look funny. Era translated aloud before she could think. He says you look funny. Tharion blinked, then gave a deep chuckle, a sound so rare it startled them both. So I do. The tension melted. They moved on, father, son, love, proud. The king stumbled over each, but he never gave up. Kale watched with growing amazement as his father's great hands, made for swords and seals, shaped the delicate language of his world. After a while, Era stepped back, letting them face each other. Try speaking without me. Tharion hesitated, then lifted his hands. Good morning, my son. The signs were imperfect but understandable. Kale's eyes shone. He answered quickly, good morning, father. I missed you. The king frowned slightly, trying to catch up. What did he? Era whispered, he said he missed you. Tharion's throat worked. He repeated the words aloud. And I missed you. Kale ran forward before anyone could stop him and threw his arms around his father's waist. For a heartbeat Tharion froze, Then he lifted the boy easily, holding him close. The old fear in Kale's face was gone, replaced by simple joy. Era turned away discreetly, blinking back tears. She'd taught lessons all her life, but never one that felt like this. Over the next weeks, the lessons continued. Each day Tharion learned a little more, and each day the palace shifted subtly around them. Guards began mimicking gestures they saw from the window. Servants passed messages with their hands when words would have drawn unwanted ears. Even the courtiers whispered that the king was changing. One afternoon, during practice, Kale asked a question with shy seriousness. "Father, do you remember Mother's lullaby?" Tharion froze, the sign for yes half formed. "I remember." Kale looked down. "Will you sign it for me someday?" "I'll try." His voice trembled slightly. "But you'll have to teach me the words again." Kale nodded, eyes bright. Together. Era, watching, realized that this was what power truly looked like, not in crowns or commands, but in the simple act of a father learning how to speak his child's language. That evening, as the sun bled over the horizon, Tharion dismissed his guards and walked with Era through the quiet corridors. The torches lit their path in gold and shadow. "You've changed him," he said finally. Era shook her head. "He changed himself. I just listened." The king gave a faint smile. "You sound like Elena when you say things like that." They paused by a window overlooking the courtyard. Below, Kale chased fireflies released by the gardeners, tiny sparks of light dancing in the twilight. Tharion spoke again, voice low. "When the council meets tomorrow, they will protest his lessons. They fear what they do not understand. Then teach them to understand," Era said. He looked at her, surprised by her certainty. "You think I can?" "I know you can. You're the king." She hesitated, then added, "But more importantly, you're his father." He nodded slowly. "You give commands like a queen." She laughed softly. "Just a servant, sire." "For now," he murmured, almost too quietly for her to hear. The next day, the council chamber filled with nobles. Lord Varin and Lord Valin sat side by side, whispering. Tharion entered with Kale at his side and Era behind them, carrying a small slate for notes. Gasps rippled through the room. No one had ever seen the mute prince inside the council before. Tharion took his throne. "Gentlemen," he said, "you will speak freely today, but you will listen as well." Lord Varin rose first, his voice oily. "Your Majesty, with respect, the boy's lessons are distracting you from matters of state." "His affliction is not an affliction," Tharion interrupted. "It is a language older than your bloodlines." Murmurs filled the chamber. "Then let him speak," Varin snapped. "Let him prove he is fit to rule." Kale looked up nervously. Era knelt beside him, signing softly, "You can do this." He nodded, then stepped forward, small but unshaken. His hands began to move. "Good morning. I am Prince Kale of Narkthaven. I thank you for serving my father and our people." Era translated aloud, her voice steady. When she finished, the chamber was silent. Kale lifted his chin. "Words can be heard with the eyes," he signed, "if hearts choose to listen." Even the courtiers who had smirked at first were struck dumb. Tharion rose, pride unmistakable. "You see," he said quietly, "my son is not weak. He simply speaks a tongue you forgot how to hear." He placed a hand on Kale's shoulder. "From this day, sign language will be studied in this palace by decree of the crown. Let no one call it witchcraft again." No one dared to object. As father and son left the chamber, Era followed behind, her heart full. In the corridor, Kale turned to her and signed, "Did I do well?" "You were magnificent," she said. Tharion added, in slow but clear signs, "Proud of you." Kale's smile lit the hall brighter than the torches. That night, the three of them met again in the courtyard. The moon was high, the willow shimmering silver. Tharion practiced the new words Era had taught him: hope, family, together. Kale corrected him with gentle laughter. Era watched them, feeling something close to peace for the first time since she'd entered the palace. "Tomorrow," Tharion said, "we'll begin preparing for the spring procession. He will stand beside me this year." Era's eyes widened. "In front of the people?" "Yes." It's time they saw him not as a curse, but as the prince he is. Kale signed quickly. Will you both stand with me? Tharion looked at Era, then nodded. Both of us. The wind stirred the moonflowers around them, scattering pale petals across the grass. They glowed faintly where they landed, tiny mirrors of the stars above. For once, Narkthaven felt alive, not with fear or power, but with the quiet language of love newly learned. The weeks after the council meeting felt different in Narkthaven. Servants who had once moved like ghosts now smiled when they passed the young prince. Guards learned simple greetings in sign language. Even the stone-cold halls seemed a little less silent. But peace in a court as old as Narkthaven never lasted long. At first the whispers were small, soft hisses behind columns when Era walked by. The king has gone soft, one guard murmured. He bows to the human girl's will. Another replied, if the boy learns to rule by her kindness, the throne will crumble. The voices spread like frost on glass. The nobles had kept quiet in the council chamber, but behind closed doors they were already gathering, led by Lord Varin. He met them in the shadow of the great crypt, where the statues of past kings stood watch. The king's heart is open, Varin said, his silver eyes glittering. And an open heart is easy to pierce. He forgets the law of blood, he lets mortals touch our air. If we do nothing, the kingdom will drown in mercy. One of the lords hesitated. What would you have us do? Remind him that power must never kneel, Varin said. The boy must be tested. And the girl who teaches him must be silenced. The next morning, Era felt the chill of that conspiracy without knowing its source. She was helping Kale rehearse for the coming spring procession, showing him how to bow and hold himself tall before the crowds. His hands moved quickly, his face bright with excitement. Do you think they'll cheer? He asked. They'll do more than cheer, she said. They'll see who you truly are. Kale looked thoughtful. It still feels strange. To be seen. You'll get used to it, she replied, smiling. Being seen can be frightening, but it's also how change begins. A voice interrupted from behind them. Fine words, for a servant. Era turned. Lord Varin stood by the archway, his dark cloak trailing on the marble. His smile didn't reach his eyes. Kale stiffened. Lord Varin, he signed politely. Varin nodded as though greeting a lesser being. Your Highness, the court wishes you strength for your first procession. Such occasions test more than courage, they test loyalty. His gaze slid to Era. One hopes those around you remember where theirs belongs. Era bowed. My loyalty is to the prince. Indeed, Varin said softly. Let us hope the king agrees. He turned and walked away, leaving a shadow colder than the winter winds that still haunted the courtyard corners. Kale frowned. I don't like him. Then stay near your father during the procession, Era said. And don't talk to him alone. Kale nodded, but worry lingered in his eyes. That evening, as the palace prepared for the festival, Era went to the library to fetch a scroll Kale had been studying. The corridors were empty, but when she reached the doorway, she saw two figures already inside. Lord Varin and Lord Valin were whispering near the shelves. She froze behind a pillar, listening. The council grows restless, Valin said. They fear the boy's speech will inspire sympathy. Varin replied, let him speak. Sympathy cannot save him if the people believe the human girl corrupted him. When they fall, we will stand ready with proof. What proof? Varin smiled thinly. Proof can be made. Era backed away slowly, heart pounding. She turned to run and bumped into someone. A guard. He grabbed her wrist. You shouldn't be here, he hissed. Before she could answer, another voice rang out. Let her go. King Tharion stepped into the corridor, eyes sharp. The guard released her instantly and bowed low. Your Majesty, I. Enough, Tharion said. He dismissed the man with a flick of his hand, then turned to Era. What were you doing here? I came for a book for the prince, she said quickly, still breathless. But I heard. She stopped. The king's face was carved from calm. You heard the council plotting. Era nodded. They want to turn the people against him. I suspected as much. He rubbed a hand across his forehead. The old blood fears what it cannot control. Then tell the truth, she said. Let everyone see you standing with him. Tharion looked at her for a long moment. You think hearts change with words? They change when they see someone brave enough to speak them. For the first time, a hint of admiration touched his expression. Then perhaps you should stand beside him tomorrow, not behind. Era's eyes widened. In the procession? Yes. As the one who gave him a voice. The day of the procession dawned bright and cold. The city streets overflowed with people eager to see their prince for the first time. Banners fluttered, bells rang, and sunlight turned every tower into fire. From the balcony above the main square, Tharion stood tall in his dark crown, Kale beside him, Era at his right hand. Murmurs rippled through the crowd when they saw her, a human, beside the royal blood. Tharion raised his hand for silence. My son, he said, will speak today. Kale stepped forward. The crowd hushed completely. His hands began to move, graceful and certain. I am Kale of Narkthaven. I greet you all. I was born without a voice, but my silence has never been empty. It carries your hopes, your fears, and my promise to be worthy of you. Era translated, her voice steady and clear. When she finished, there was silence, then applause that rose like thunder. In the corner of the square, Lord Varin's eyes narrowed. He gave a subtle nod to a hooded figure among the guards. The man slipped away through the crowd, a small glass vial hidden in his palm. After the procession, as dusk fell, the palace held a banquet. Laughter and music filled the hall, but Era felt a prickle of unease. She saw the hooded guard twice near the doors, then lost him in the throng. Kale sat beside his father, glowing with pride. They clapped for me, he signed. They clapped because you shone, Era whispered back. She barely noticed the servant pouring wine into the king's goblet until it was too late. A faint shimmer, a drop too dark, fell into the drink. Wait, she shouted, but the king had already lifted the cup. She darted forward, knocking the goblet from his hand. Red liquid splashed across the table. Gasps filled the hall. Tharion rose slowly. Explain yourself. Era pointed to the servant, who was already trying to slip away. Guards seized him. Under questioning, the man stammered, it was Lord Varin, my lord. He said it was a tonic. Tharion's gaze hardened. Take him to the dungeons. And bring me Varin. But Varin was gone. The hall erupted in chaos. Era stood trembling, the spilled wine pooling around her shoes like blood. Kale clung to her sleeve, eyes wide with fear. It's over, she said softly, though she wasn't sure she believed it. By morning, the palace felt hollow. Lord Varin had vanished into the city, taking several loyal guards with him. The council demanded an inquiry against Era. She threw the goblet, Valin declared before the assembled lords. A human servant attacked the king in public. Whether from fear or guilt, her action endangered the crown. She saved my life, Tharion said coldly. Or drew attention away from her own crime, Valin countered. You forget, your majesty, she alone was close enough to add poison unseen. Era's stomach turned. That's not true. Valin ignored her. We ask only for fairness. Let her be tried by the law. The king's knuckles whitened on the arm of his throne. Around them, murmurs grew, half fear, half anger. The nobles smelled weakness. Tharion's voice cut through the noise. So be it. There will be a hearing at dusk. Era bowed her head. As you command, sire. When she was led away, Kale broke free from his attendants and ran after her. I'll tell them the truth. He signed frantically. You didn't hurt anyone. She knelt, meeting his eyes. You can't come. Promise me you'll stay with your father. Tears filled his eyes. I don't want to lose you. You won't. She touched his cheek gently. Remember what I told you. Words can be heard with the eyes. He nodded, swallowing hard. The great hall was packed by the time the hearing began. Torches flickered along the walls, throwing long shadows. The nobles filled the benches, whispering eagerly. The king sat on the throne, face unreadable. Era stood in the center, guarded on either side. Valin paced before her like a cat tasting blood. You entered forbidden places, he said. You meddled in royal affairs. And yesterday you struck the king's hand before all Narkthaven. Tell us, girl, what do you call loyalty? Era lifted her chin. Doing what's right, even when it angers those in power. The nobles hissed. Valin smiled thinly. Bold words from a servant. He turned to the crowd. You all saw it, she spilled the royal drink. Perhaps she meant to save him, perhaps to cover her crime. Only the gods know. But should we risk the crown on her word alone? A murmur of agreement rippled through the hall. Tharion remained silent, his eyes on her face. Finally Era spoke, voice trembling but clear. If I were guilty, I'd have let him drink. But I didn't. Because I care for the prince and his father. You call that witchcraft, I call it loyalty. Valin spread his hands theatrically. Then prove it. You claim the prince loves you? Let him speak for you. Gasps broke out. Everyone turned as the doors opened. Kale stood there, small and pale but determined. Guards moved to stop him. Tharion raised a hand. Let him through. Kale walked into the center of the hall and faced the nobles. His hands began to move, each sign crisp and deliberate. She saved him, he told them. She taught me to speak. She taught you to listen. Era translated, her voice breaking. He says I saved you. That I taught him to speak. Kale went on, his signs faster now. If you punish her, you punish kindness itself. The hall fell utterly silent. Tharion rose slowly from the throne. You have heard the air of Narkthaven. Valin tried to speak, but the king's glare silenced him. She will not be punished, Tharion said. And those who doubt her loyalty will answer to me. He turned to Era. From this day, your station is raised. You will serve as royal interpreter for my son and for me. The crowd erupted, half in outrage, half in awe. But Tharion's command was law. He took Kale's hand and placed it in hers. This court was built on fear, he said. Today, it learns another kind of strength. Era bowed deeply, tears shining in her eyes. Kale smiled up at his father, signing quietly, thank you. Tharion returned the sign, still awkward but sure. Family. That night, Narkthaven's halls glowed with candlelight. The king's decree spread quickly through the palace and out into the city. Some whispered that the human girl had bewitched the crown, others said she had awakened its heart. In the quiet of the moon courtyard, Era sat beside Kale beneath the willow tree. Fireflies drifted like tiny stars. Kale leaned against her shoulder, tired but peaceful. We won, he signed. For now, she said softly. But there will be others who want to stop us. He nodded. Then we'll teach them too. Above them, in a window of the high tower, Tharion watched. He thought of Elena, of promises broken and now remade. He made the sign his son had taught him only days ago, hope, and the gesture felt like the first prayer he'd spoken in years. Spring had barely ended when the whispers began again, quieter this time, but sharper. Lord Varin was gone from the palace, yet his allies still breathed his name in secret. Some claimed he had fled across the northern mountains. Others swore he was dead. The truth was simpler, Varin was waiting. 4 months, Era's new role as royal interpreter drew attention from every corner of the court. Some looked at her with admiration. Others with quiet hatred. She stood beside the king in council meetings, translating Kale's hands into speech, and for the first time in living memory, both voices, the spoken and the silent, ruled together. Kale grew taller and more confident. He studied ancient scrolls, learning how diplomacy worked. His hands moved faster now, sharp with thought, gentle with emotion. He began inventing new signs for ideas that didn't yet exist in the vampire-tongued peace, choice, belonging. And Era wrote them down carefully each night, knowing they were writing history with every gesture. But peace is fragile. And the old blood of Narkthaven was not ready to surrender its power. One cool evening, as torches flickered along the palace walls, a messenger arrived from the border. The guard at the gate brought him straight to the king. His clothes were torn, his face pale with fear. "My lord," he gasped, falling to one knee. "There's rebellion in the north. Soldiers march under the banner of Lord Varin. He calls himself protector of the pure blood." The hall fell into stunned silence. Era's heart lurched. She looked to the king, but Tharion's face remained calm, carved in cold resolve. "Prepare the council," he said quietly. "Narkthaven will not fall to ghosts." That night, the council chamber filled again. Era stood behind the king, Kale at his right. The nobles argued, their voices rising like crows in the rafters. "Varin's forces number thousands," one cried. "He has the support of the old clans," said another. "They claim your rule has been tainted by human hands." The last words struck like arrows. Every gaze turned briefly to Era. She met them without flinching. Tharion's voice cut through the noise. "You fear a man who hides behind old bloodlines. I fear a kingdom that cannot see beyond them." A few lords muttered, but none dared answer. "We will march," Tharion declared. "But not in rage. We march to protect our people, all of them. Kale will stay here, he must be the voice that keeps Narkthaven steady." Kale looked up quickly, signing, "I can help." Era translated, "He wishes to fight with you." Tharion shook his head. "You will fight in another way, my son. You will keep the court from turning on itself." Kale's shoulders sank, but he nodded reluctantly. When the meeting ended, Tharion called Era aside. "While I'm gone, you will stand with him in my place. The court will listen to your words as my own." Era hesitated. "Sire, I'm honored, but..." He stopped her with a raised hand. "You gave my son a voice. Now I trust you to help him keep it." For several weeks, Tharion's army marched north, and the palace lived in uneasy quiet. Kale sat the throne each morning beside Era, signing decrees and settling small disputes. The servants had begun learning signs too, so even the kitchens and stables buzzed with the new language. But one night, everything changed. A storm gathered over the city, fierce and wild. The wind howled through the corridors like voices from the crypt. Kale was in the moon courtyard, practicing his speech for his father's return. Era watched him fondly from the fountain, the glow of lanterns soft on their faces. "You've improved so much," she said. "Your mother would be proud." Kale smiled. "And you?" "I already am." He was about to reply when a sudden noise echoed from the gate, a clash of metal, a shout, then silence. Before they could react, the doors burst open. A dozen armed men rushed into the courtyard. Era froze. The crest on their cloaks, the twin serpents, belonged to Varin. Kale's eyes went wide. "Guards." He signed frantically. But the palace guards were too far. Era stepped in front of him, her heart pounding. Their leader, a tall vampire with a scar across his cheek, pointed his sword at her. "By order of Lord Varin, the false servant and the cursed heir are to be taken." Kale stepped forward, trembling but defiant. "My father rules this realm. Not Varin." The man sneered. "Your father is dead. Fell in battle 2 days past." The words hit like a blow. Era's knees buckled. Kale shook his head violently, signing, "Lies. Believe what you wish," the soldier said coldly. "But come quietly, and maybe your deaths will be swift." Era looked at Kale. "Run," she whispered. He shook his head. "Not without you." Before the soldier could move, Era grabbed the nearest lantern and hurled it at him. Flames exploded, scattering the intruders. She seized Kale's hand, dragging him through the side door. They ran through the hallways, their footsteps echoing. Behind them, the rebels shouted orders. Swords clashed against the stone doors as they chased. "This way," Era gasped, pulling Kale into the servants' stairway. "We'll hide in the old vault." They burst into the narrow tunnel beneath the east wing. The air was damp and cold. Kale clung to her sleeve, shaking. "He's not dead," he signed fiercely. "Father's not dead." "I know," she said breathlessly. "He's too stubborn to die." From somewhere above, a horn sounded the palace alarm. Loyal guards had noticed the attack. But before relief could set in, a shadow appeared at the tunnel's end. The scarred soldier stepped forward, sword gleaming in the torchlight. "You should have stayed hidden, little human." Era pushed Kale behind her, gripping a fallen spear from the wall. "Stay back," she warned. The man smiled, advancing. "You think you can fight me? I don't have to win," she said through gritted teeth. I just have to keep you from him. He lunged. Era blocked the strike clumsily. The impact jolted through her arm. The fight was desperate, his strength against her courage. She barely dodged the next blow, and pain flashed along her side. Then, a blur of motion. Cale had grabbed a loose chain from the wall and swung it wildly. It struck the man's wrist, knocking the sword aside. Era kicked hard, sending him sprawling. Shouts filled the corridor, royal guards. The rebels fled into the darkness as steel clashed behind them. When it was over, Era and Cale stood panting, surrounded by soldiers. One knelt. My lady, the king lives. He sends word Lord Varin's army was scattered at dawn. Era sagged with relief. Cale's eyes flooded with tears. His alive. She nodded, clutching his hand. His alive. But in that same moment, she noticed the blood on her own dress, the wound along her ribs, shallow but burning. Cale saw it too and went pale. You're hurt. It's nothing, she said weakly. Just a scratch. He shook his head. You can't lie to me. Not you. The boy tore part of his cloak and pressed it to her side, his hands trembling. For the first time, he spoke, his voice raw and broken from disuse. Don't die. Era froze. The single whisper, so small and human, shattered her heart. I won't, she promised, tears mixing with rain. When the king returned days later, victorious but weary, he found them waiting at the gate, his son alive, the girl pale but standing. And when Cale saw him, he ran forward, signing wildly, tears streaming down his face. Tharion dropped to one knee, pulling him close. I told you, my son, he whispered, his own voice shaking. I always come back. Era stood nearby, smiling through exhaustion. The king met her gaze over Cale's shoulder. No words were needed. 2 weeks later, Narchthaven stood reborn. The rebellion had failed. Lord Varin's banners were torn down, his followers imprisoned or exiled. The city held its breath, waiting for the king's next words. On the first day of summer, the court gathered in the grand hall. The air shimmered with torchlight and expectation. Era stood near the throne, Cale beside her in his ceremonial cloak. The murmur of nobles filled the room like the rustle of restless wings. When Tharion entered, silence fell. He walked slowly to the center, the weight of years visible in his shoulders, but his eyes were clear, alive with purpose. He held no crown today, only a simple chain of silver that gleamed faintly in the light. My people, he began, his deep voice steady, you have called me king by right of blood. Yet blood alone cannot rule. I have seen the cost of silence, and I will see it no longer. He gestured to Cale. This is my son, Prince Cale of Narchthaven, born mute but never voiceless. Through him, I have learned what power truly means. Cale lifted his hands and began to sign. Era translated each word aloud. I once thought silence was weakness, Cale signed, his movements calm but strong. But silence is only empty when no one listens. My father listened. My teacher listened. And because of them, I can speak to you today. He turned to the nobles. You call me cursed. But my curse was your fear. And now it's broken. Era's voice carried his words through the hall like wind over still water. Some nobles lowered their eyes. Others wept openly. Tharion lifted the silver chain. 4 centuries, we worshipped the sound of command. From this day, we will honor the strength of understanding. He handed the chain to Era. This will be the symbol of our unity, the chain of voices. From today forward, sign language shall be the second royal tongue of Narchthaven. All will learn it. All will speak it. Let no one call it witchcraft again. Era bowed deeply as she accepted the chain, tears in her eyes. Around her, courtiers followed the king's example, pressing hands to hearts in silent respect. Then Tharion turned to his son. And as for you, Cale, you are no longer the silent heir. You are the voice of the new dawn. The hall erupted in applause, real, loud, and joyous. Cale smiled, overwhelmed. Era stood behind him, heart swelling with pride. For once, the walls of Narchthaven echoed not with commands or fear, but with celebration. That night, the city lit lanterns in every window. In the moon courtyard, Tharion, Cale, and Era stood together beneath the willow tree. The air smelled of summer rain. Kale signed softly, "Do you think they'll really change?" Era smiled. "Change takes time. But you gave them the first reason to try." Tharion placed a hand on both their shoulders. "You have my gratitude, Era Thorn. You've done more for this kingdom than any general I've ever known." She shook her head. "All I did was listen." "Then may the world learn to listen as well," the king said. Kale bent and picked up a small red stone from the ground, the same one he had once given her months ago. He pressed it into her palm again. "Red is for brave." She looked down at it, the color glowing faintly in the moonlight. "And you, Kale?" "Red is for us," he signed with a grin. For a long while, they stood together in silence, not the kind born of fear, but the gentle quiet of peace hard won. Above them, the moon rose high, bright and full, shining down on a kingdom that had finally learned how to hear. The morning of the new season arrived with skies as clear as glass. Every bell in Narkthaven rang to welcome it, echoing from the towers until the sound trembled in the mountains. It was the first celebration held under the new law, the Festival of Voices. For the first time in history, banners of both silver and crimson, symbols of speech and silence, hung together over the city. In the royal chambers, Era adjusted Kale's ceremonial cloak. The deep blue fabric shimmered faintly as he turned. He had grown taller in the months since the decree, his hair brushed his collar now, and his smile came easily. "You look like a prince today," she said. "I am a prince every day," he signed with mock pride. Then, smaller, "But today I get to be seen." Era grinned. "Then let's make them see the truth." The door opened and King Tharion entered, already dressed for the ceremony. Unlike the other nobles, he wore no jewels, only a single silver band on his wrist etched with the words "Hear the Silent." "You're both ready," he said, studying them. His eyes softened. "You remind me of your mother, Kale." Kale's smile wavered. "Do you miss her still?" "Every day," the king replied. "But I see her in you." He offered his arm to his son. "Shall we?" The streets of Narkthaven overflowed. Vampires and humans alike crowded the square, faces upturned toward the balcony of the great hall. Petals drifted from the towers like rain. The air was full of music and the rhythmic stamping of drums. When Tharion stepped onto the balcony with Kale and Era beside him, the crowd roared. It wasn't the roar of fear or duty, it was joy. The sound rolled through the streets like thunder. Kale blinked, overwhelmed. "They're cheering for us." "For you," Era whispered. "You gave them something to believe in." Tharion raised his hand for quiet. "People of Narkthaven," he began, his voice carrying far. "Today we celebrate not victory or conquest, but understanding. Once, this kingdom spoke in many tongues yet heard nothing. Now we have found a language that binds rather than divides." He stepped aside, gesturing to Kale. The boy faced the crowd. His hands began to move, fluid and sure. "We are more than blood. We are more than fear. We are the stories we choose to tell each other." Era's clear voice echoed his words. "We are more than blood. We are more than fear. We are the stories we choose to tell each other." A hush fell. Even the wind seemed to pause. Kale continued, "When I was small, I thought silence was a wall. But it was a door waiting to be opened. And you opened it with me." When she finished translating, the crowd erupted again. But this time, instead of cheering, people lifted their hands and formed the royal sign for hope, palms up, fingers spread like light. Thousands of hands shimmered in unison. Kale gasped, eyes shining. "They know our sign." Era nodded, tears glinting. "You taught them without even trying." Tharion stood silent beside them, his gaze sweeping across the people. For the first time in decades, he felt something he thought long dead, pride without pain. He turned slightly, signing for the crowd to see. "My son." A ripple of emotion went through the square. The king's heavy, deliberate hands, once feared for war, now moved in gentle affirmation. The gesture meant more than any speech could. As the music began again, Era caught sight of children copying Kale's signs in play. The sight filled her with quiet warmth. For a moment, she believed the worst was behind them. But in the highest shadow of the bell tower, a gloved hand rested on a crossbow. The festivities stretched long into the afternoon. Markets bustled, and the scent of roasted fruit and spiced wine drifted through the air. Inside the palace, Kale wandered among guests, greeting nobles with his practiced signs while Era translated. The king watched from his seat, speaking little, letting his son lead. When Kale finished speaking with a group of visiting scholars, he turned to Era, eyes bright. "Father is smiling. He should," she said. "His kingdom finally feels alive. And you're the reason." She laughed. "I only helped you start it." A page hurried up, bowing low. "Your Highness, the balcony awaits. The people wish for one last appearance before sunset." Kale looked to his father. Tharion nodded. "Go with Era. Let them see what you've built." The boy grinned and took her hand. Together they stepped out once more into the glowing light of dusk. The crowd below still filled the square, their faces golden in the setting sun. The drums slowed to a steady heartbeat rhythm. Kale lifted his hands to sign a final farewell. "Thank you for believing." And then the sound came. A sharp crack, like stone breaking. Kale staggered. For a heartbeat, no one moved. Then Era saw it, the thin, dark shaft jutting from his shoulder. "Kale," she screamed, catching him as he fell. The crowd gasped. Panic rippled outward. Guards surged forward, scanning the rooftops. "Find the shooter." Tharion's voice thundered from the doorway. "Seal the gates." Era pressed her hands to the wound. The arrow was shallow but bleeding fast. Kale's face had gone white. His fingers trembled. "Era. Don't talk," she said. "Stay with me. Just breathe." He shook his head weakly, signing again. "No, you." Then she felt it, movement behind her. Another arrow sang through the air. Without thinking, she turned, throwing herself between the shooter and the boy. Pain blossomed through her chest. She fell hard, the world tilting sideways. Somewhere far away, she heard Tharion shouting, guards rushing, chaos. Kale was beside her now, blood on his hands as he tried to stop hers. "No. Era." She smiled faintly. "You talk so much for a silent prince. Don't." His signs broke apart, trembling. "Don't leave me." Her hand found his. She shaped the words with slow fingers. "Red is for brave." And then she went still. The square burned with confusion. Guards swarmed the rooftops, finding only an empty crossbow and a single black feather. The people shouted, cried, prayed. Tharion carried Era himself, his face grey with shock, Kale clinging to his arm, sobbing silently. They took her to the royal infirmary. Healers worked through the night, binding the wound with elixirs of silver and blood moss. The arrow had missed her heart by the width of a finger. By dawn, the king stood outside her door, armor half buckled, refusing rest. When the healer emerged, she bowed low. "She lives, my lord. But she will be weak for many days." Tharion closed his eyes, whispering a prayer he hadn't spoken in years. "Thank you." Inside, Era slept, her face pale but peaceful. Kale sat beside her, holding her hand. When she stirred hours later, his relief was so fierce he almost shouted. Instead, he seized her hand and signed furiously, "You scared me." She smiled faintly. "I scare everyone eventually." He shook his head. "Don't joke." "All right," she said softly. "No jokes." The door opened and Tharion entered quietly. For once, the great king looked small. "You saved him," he said simply. "I only did what anyone would," she murmured. "No," he said. "Not anyone. Many would have let fate decide. You chose." He sank to one knee beside her bed. "Because of you, my son lives. Because of you, my kingdom has a future. Tell me, how can a king repay that?" "Keep listening," she whispered. He bowed his head. "Always." The assassin was caught 2 days later trying to flee through the western gate, a mercenary loyal to Lord Varin, carrying letters signed by the rebels' lieutenants. Under questioning, he confessed that the attack had been meant for the prince, not the king. Varin's remaining allies hoped to shatter the fragile peace by killing the symbol of change. When news of the capture spread, the city erupted again, but this time in unity. Nobles who had once doubted now demanded justice. The people lined the streets outside the palace, holding candles instead of torches. For Era, still recovering, the sight from her window brought tears to her eyes. Kale visited daily, bringing stories from the court. Father made a new decree, he told her one morning. He says every noble child will learn our language. That's wonderful, she said. He calls it the law of the hand and heart. Era laughed softly. Your father has a poet's soul, after all. Kale grinned. He says he learned from you. When she was strong enough to walk, Era joined the king and prince for a final ceremony in the courtyard, the same place where everything had begun. The willow tree bent gently in the breeze, its leaves whispering like voices of the past. Tharion stood before the crowd, his son at his side, and addressed them in both words and signs. Once, silence ruled these halls, he said. It ruled my heart. But today, silence is not a prison, it is peace. It is the space where listening begins. He turned to Era, his eyes bright. This woman reminded us that understanding is the truest strength. And so, in the name of the crown, I grant her the title of Voicekeeper of Narkthaven. Her duty will be to preserve our new language for all generations. The crowd cheered. Kale hugged her fiercely. You deserve this. I only wanted to help you speak, she whispered. You helped us all. Tharion lifted a hand for quiet. Today, the court and the people of Narkthaven will speak together. Raise your hands. Thousands of palms opened toward the sky, fingers spreading in the shape of the sign for hope. The sight stretched across the city like a silver wave. Kale turned to the crowd and signed slowly, clearly, we are one voice now. Era spoke the words aloud, her voice carrying over the square. We are one voice now. The drums struck once, twice, 3 times, and then the people began to sign the same phrase back, thousands of hands moving in rhythm until the entire city shimmered with motion. From the highest tower, the bells rang again, their sound mingling with the silent language below. That night, the palace returned to quiet. Era walked alone through the corridors, touching the carved symbols newly engraved into the walls, the signs for love, courage, family. Each stone felt warm under her fingers. She paused at the window overlooking the courtyard. Kale was there with his father, releasing lanterns into the sky. Their lights drifted upward, tiny stars against the dark. She smiled, whispering to herself, red is for brave. The small stone still hung around her neck. Below, Kale looked up and saw her at the window. He raised his hands and signed, thank you, Era. She pressed her palm to the glass and returned the sign. Always. Morning broke over Narkthaven with a light that felt entirely new. For the first time in living memory, the city was awake not with fear, but with purpose. The attack that had nearly stolen the kingdom's joy had instead forged its unity. The people whispered the same words everywhere, the Voicekeeper lives. And wherever those words spread, hands lifted to shape the sign for hope. Era spent her first days of recovery walking the palace gardens with Kale. He refused to leave her side. Each morning he brought her scrolls filled with children's drawings, little hands signing words like family and peace. Some were crude, others full of color. All carried the same message, the language of silence had found its way beyond the palace walls. One afternoon, Kale found her under the willow tree, the air soft with the scent of summer blossoms. You should rest, he signed, frowning. I am resting, she said with a small smile. I'm just doing it standing up. He rolled his eyes in exaggerated disapproval, then sat beside her. Father says we're rebuilding the northern provinces. He wants me to go with him next month. That's wonderful, she said. They'll see what kind of prince you are. Kale hesitated. What if they still hate me? Because of what I am? Era turned to face him. Then you'll remind them what you became. The prince who taught a kingdom to listen. He looked down at his hands. It still feels strange, being heard. It always will, she said softly. That's how you know it matters. He smiled a little, but before he could reply, the sound of boots approached. King Tharion strode across the courtyard, his cloak billowing behind him. He looked younger these days, though streaks of silver still marked his hair. Era, he said warmly. The new school opens today. You should see it. Her eyebrows lifted. The school? Tharion nodded. For teaching the royal language. It stands where the old war barracks used to be. A better use for those walls. The school was beautiful in its simplicity. Wide arched windows flooded the rooms with light. On the front gates, carved deep into stone, were the words, "The House of Hands." Inside, children, vampire and human alike, sat together, practicing the alphabet of signs. Their small fingers fluttered clumsily but joyfully. When Era entered, the lessons stopped. Dozens of children turned to look, and one little girl with bright eyes signed shyly, "You're the voice keeper." Era laughed softly. "That's what they call me, yes." The girl came forward, her tiny hands shaking as she signed, "Thank you. My brother couldn't speak. Now we talk every day." Era's throat tightened. "You don't need to thank me," she said, kneeling. "Thank your prince. He's the one who made this happen." Kale, standing nearby, flushed with quiet pride. The children turned their eyes to him, their small hands signing thank you all at once. He signed back, "You're welcome," his smile wide. Tharion watched the scene with folded arms, saying nothing. When Era rose, he leaned close enough that only she could hear. "Every king hopes to build monuments," he murmured. "But this will outlast us all." Era looked around at the room full of laughing children, and for once, she believed him. That evening, the palace held a small gathering to honor the teachers who had volunteered for the House of Hands. The grand hall was lit not with torches but with floating glass globes of light that shimmered when touched, dimming and brightening like hearts that breathed. Era sat quietly near the edge of the crowd, still a little unsteady. Tharion approached with a goblet of wine. "You disappear too easily these days. I've had enough of speeches for a lifetime," she said with a smile. "Let Kale take them. He's already learning to dodge them," Tharion replied, amused. His gaze softened. "I never thanked you properly. Not as a man, only as a king." "You don't have to." "I do," he interrupted gently. "Because you reminded me how to be both." For a moment, they simply looked at each other. No words, no signs, just understanding. Then he raised his goblet slightly in salute. "To the woman who gave my son back his voice, and gave his father a reason to listen." She blushed and looked away, but her smile lingered long after he'd moved to greet the others. Later that night, as moonlight spilled through her window, Era sat at her desk, writing. On the parchment were the first pages of the Royal Code of Signs, a complete record of the language, its history, and its future. Her handwriting was careful, almost reverent. Each word was more than ink, it was legacy. Kale slipped in quietly. "Can't sleep?" she asked without looking up. He shook his head. "I was thinking. When I'm king someday, will I still need an interpreter?" Era smiled, setting her quill down. "Maybe not. But every king needs someone who understands him." "Then you can never leave," he signed. "I'll always be here, Kale," she promised. "Even if you can't see me, you'll hear me in every word you sign." He leaned against her shoulder. "Then the kingdom will always speak right." By midsummer, the language of signs had spread far beyond the palace. Markets bustled with vendors who signed prices with their hands. Soldiers saluted in the new way, open palms instead of clenched fists. And in the city's temples, priests signed blessings for both the living and the lost. It wasn't a perfect world yet, there were still those who whispered that change was weakness, but the whispers were fading. And each day, the kingdom spoke a little more clearly. Era often walked among the people in plain clothes, unnoticed except for the red stone pendant she wore. Children ran past her, laughing, their fingers shaping words faster than their tongues could. It made her heart feel full, and strange, and steady all at once. One evening, she returned to the palace and found Kale teaching a group of nobles in the garden. He stood tall now, his signs confident. Tharion watched from a bench, eyes bright with pride. Era stopped in the doorway, unseen. She thought back to that first day in the moon courtyard when the boy had been small and frightened, and she had signed just 2 simple words, "Are you hurt?" Now, looking at him, she knew the answer had finally changed. He wasn't hurt anymore. Years later, the people of Narkthaven would say that the kingdom changed on 2 days, the day the servant spoke to the silent prince, and the day the prince taught the kingdom to listen. The years that followed were full of quiet wonder. The old palace walls, once symbols of fear, became halls of learning. The moonlit courtyard where Era and Kale first met was turned into a garden school for deaf children from across the lands. Travelers came from human and vampire realms alike to see it. Era became known throughout both worlds as the voice keeper, guardian of the language she had helped restore. She lived in a small study lined with scrolls and books, where students came daily to learn and record new words. Her hair silvered over time, but her hands remained graceful, speaking fluently even when her voice grew tired. Kale grew into a young man, then into a ruler. When Tharion finally laid down his crown, it was Kale who lifted it, his eyes steady, his heart open. During his coronation, he spoke not with his mouth but with his hands, and the entire court signed their pledge of loyalty in return. Era watched from the crowd, her throat tight with pride. The boy who had once feared his own silence now ruled with it. Afterward, he found her in the garden. "I wish you had stood beside me," he signed. "I already did," she said, smiling. "You just didn't see me." He looked down at the old red stone that still hung around her neck. "You still keep it?" "Always," she replied. "It reminds me that courage doesn't end, it grows." He reached out and touched the stone gently. "Then I'll carry it when you can't." The following spring, Kale ordered a monument built at the city's center, a tall obelisk carved with both written words and signs. Its inscription read, "In silence we were divided. In listening we became whole." Beneath it stood a statue of 3 figures, a boy with open hands, a woman reaching toward him, and a king watching them both with pride. People from every province visited it to make the sign for hope, the one gesture that had outlived every war. Era rarely went to see it. She preferred the living language around her, the children who laughed as they learned, the families who spoke across worlds without words. But one evening, she found herself there, standing before the monument as the sun set. A small child tugged her sleeve. "Lady Voicekeeper, what does this mean?" he asked, mimicking the sign carved on the base. Era smiled. "It means together." He repeated it carefully, his small fingers slow but certain. "Together," he said aloud. She nodded. "That's right." As he ran off to join his friends, Era looked up at the sky. The first stars had begun to appear, soft, distant lights, like the lanterns that once rose after the Festival of Voices. The memory brought tears to her eyes, but they were gentle ones. Behind her, she heard the sound of footsteps. Kale, now king, stood at her side. "Do you ever miss it?" she asked softly. "What?" "The silence before all this." He smiled faintly. "Sometimes. But then I remember what silence cost us." They stood for a moment, watching the lights of the city flicker below. "You taught me everything," he signed. She shook her head. "You taught me to listen." He lifted his hands again, slowly. "I still carry your promise. And I still believe in it," she said. "As long as one person listens, it never ends." Kale looked at her then, the faint wind stirring his dark hair. "Then the world will never fall silent again." Years later, when the chronicles of Narktaven were written, scholars would end the tale not with a war or a coronation, but with a single memory, an old woman in the palace courtyard, teaching a group of children beneath the silver willow tree. Her hands moved like sunlight through leaves. Each sign she made carried the echo of every moment that had shaped the kingdom, the kindness of a servant, the courage of a child, and the redemption of a king. When one little boy asked her, "Lady, what is the last word in your book?" she smiled and raised her hands. "This," she said, shaping the sign for hope. "What does it mean?" the child asked. "It means," she whispered, "that even in silence, we still speak." The boy copied her motion carefully. Then, giggling, he ran off to join the others, their laughter rising like music over the courtyard. Era watched them until her eyes blurred. The sun slipped behind the towers, and the first evening star blinked awake. She pressed the red stone against her heart and closed her eyes. The world, once deaf and divided, now sang without sound. And in that endless, golden quiet, the servant who once spoke to a silent prince finally rested, knowing the kingdom she loved would never stop listening. If this story touched your heart, don't let it fade into silence. Hit subscribe, tap the bell, and join our kingdom of storytellers where every voice, even the quiet ones, are heard.